interview Jed, probably a man you know pretty well and know what his mission is, but we're going to get to know him and what he's up to and what he has to say about the challenges that men are facing today and what we can do about it. So, today is day 6 of the summit, and the main topic today is men's work and isolation. So, over on the main site, callingallmensummit.com, Hans will post a link in the comments, but over on the main site, there's a bunch of great men talking about the power of men's work and how the difference it made for them in their life, and the work that they do to bring men together. I know that our next guest is quite familiar with men's work and has been involved in it for a decade or two, or maybe 3 or 4. Mr. Jed Diamond is one of the world's leading experts in the emerging field of gender-specific medicine and men's health. He founded Men Alive in 1972, shortly after the birth of his son Jamal and daughter Angela. He and his wife Carlin are proud parents of 5 children, 17 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. He is the author of 17 books, including international bestsellers, Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places. That sounds like a biography of Hans' life. The Irritable Male Syndrome and Male Menopause. Welcome, Mr. Jed.
Good to be with you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Michael.
So you're out there on the West Coast. What time is it this morning? Are we 9 a.m.?
About 9 a.m. in California, in Willits, where I live. Absolutely. We're bright and early here.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. Hans is in Medellin. I'm in Nairobi. So we got a 3-continent deal going on and a worldwide audience. So, Jed, yes. I wonder if you would share with us, it's a major topic. We're gathering men. Many of us, either we didn't have fathers growing up, or dad left home, or maybe it wasn't a great connection to dad and or brotherhood. Maybe we missed rites of passage. What's your own personal story related to that?
Yeah, well, for me, I think, and is true for many, many guys, that my awakening, or the kind of origin story of my work, came November 21st, 1969, when I held my newborn son in my arms for the first time, shortly after his birth. And amidst tears and joy of coming into the world, getting through a fairly long labor process with my wife, I made a promise to my newborn son that I would be a different kind of father than my father was able to be for me, and to do everything I could to create a world where men were fully healthy and healed and were involved with their families throughout their lives. And related to it was the father that I didn't have. My father, I was born in 1943, so you get the gray hair, and I'll be 80 a little later this year.
Wow.
And shortly after I was born, my father had become increasingly depressed and worried about being able to support his family with my being born in the profession that he loved at the time. He was an actor, playwright, and writer, and not able to make a decent living at the time, not so different from many men today. And in my case, my father, in his depression and despondency, took an overdose of sleeping pills. And he didn't die, but he was committed to a state mental hospital. And I spent my early years visiting him, first as a 5-year-old child when he first took the overdose, and then over the next year visiting with my uncle And early on, I grew up really with the terror of what happened to my father and trying to understand it, wondering when it would happen to me, and what I could do in some way, even as a child, to help other families that were in similar situations. So that was kind of implanted in me all these many years, 75 years ago. And when my own son was birthed, now almost 54 years ago, that started me on this journey to heal men and our relationships and the fragile relationship that we have to the planet we all share, given that human beings are quite out of balance. I think we'd all agree with the laws of nature. So that's really how I got started and what still uh, infuses my passion for this work.
Uh-huh. Yes. Wow. That's a long time to be walking the planet. What kind of internet did they have back then?
Yeah. Yeah, it was very intuitive. It was called a can with a long string that you talk
Right.
to, the kid next door.
Jed, what is man? What is Men Alive?
Well, Men Alive is really captures what I'm about, is to help men live fully healthy lives, starting with myself, my son, my father, who has a long story, but he didn't die, and I reconnected with him later in life. And it's the name of my website that I started, as you said, in 1972, menalive.com, which really is my window to the world. It kind of houses my articles, my books, my courses, my classes, the way people can reach me for counseling and support, and the various activities that I do in support of that vision to help my own healing, help my family to heal, and help all of you that are, now part of this worldwide movement that was not in existence when I started. And I feel very both glad and wonderfully connected to see so many more men and their families who find this work to be their passion as well.
Yes, amen. Well, it doesn't say here in your bio, but you've also been a counselor for a long time, right?
Yeah, I started, in a way when I was 5 years old. I wasn't getting paid to be a counselor, but in many ways, what I was doing is trying to help my father even before. I think some of us have this almost inkling of a calling that we're not even aware of early on, usually from some kind of trauma that we grew up with. And then to somehow help my mother, who didn't want to connect, who found her own escapes. And later, I found she went through her own father wound because she lost her father when she was 5 years old. And I didn't even come to understand that till later in life. So I've been a professional counselor. I got my master's degree in social work in 1968, and then went back later to get a PhD in international health. A number of years later, actually at midlife, I decided to go back to school as I was doing more international work. So I've been being a counselor really since 1968, and been, doing the work in the world, mostly started where I was living in California, and with the publication of my beginning with my books, I started to get an international following and started connecting with people all over the world.
Hmm. I, yeah, I'd love to talk about a couple of those books. One of your books is titled "Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places." What were those wrong places you were looking in?
Uh, well, the
It
subtitle,
probably wasn't Tinder, right?
if you looked at the subtitle of "Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places," the subtitle is "Overcoming Romantic and Sexual Addictions," which might tell you a little bit about where I was looking at the time for what I thought was, love, passion, sex, the kind of thing that young men and young women are looking for in our lives. But because of the wounds, because of the lack of guidance from fathers and brothers and mentors at the time, I was looking both outside myself for the fulfillment that I didn't have, looking for the fathers and mothers and care and compassion I didn't have. And for many of us, men in particular, I think we get, some of us, caught up in compulsive acting out of our sexual desires. In other words, looking for sexual fulfillment in the wrong places with the wrong people at the wrong time. I woke up, as we either do or we die, when I found myself sneaking in to the house of a coworker who was married at the time, and I was married at the time, but we had this kind of unhealthy but very passionate romantic relationship. She had invited me over to her house for a little afternoon delight, so to speak. And she mentioned as we were getting there that her husband rarely came home on his lunch hour. It, kind of started rarely. And I knew he was not somebody you would want to come home on his lunch hour. He was a county sheriff and he carried a gun. But at the time, what went through my head, this is typical of addicts of all kinds, was in my case, thinking of, well, we're going to have this great sex and we all have to die sometime. Wouldn't that be a great way to die? When I came out of my haze, luckily he didn't come home. I got home and I said, this is crazy. If I don't get into some kind of recovery, it won't be long before there will be some kind of a result that would not be one I really would want. And so, seriously, I can kind of joke about it now, but at the time it was deadly serious. And it was the beginning of my, active recovery in the area of sexual addiction. And then my, as you point out in the book, was the result of sharing that. If you read any of my books, you'll recognize that most of them, if not all of them, are expressions of what I went through in my growth process, what I learned from the experience, and what I hoped would be helpful to others.
Jed, is your work or your clients, have they been mainly or limited to Americans, Western, or have you worked beyond that and seen some, say, cultural differences?
Well, both. I work in the United States, and early on, my clients were people that were from the U.S. primarily. But as my books became known in other parts of the world, and I began being invited to teach and train in Europe, I've been to Australia, New Zealand, not everywhere in the world, but many places. And so increasingly, I began both seeing people when I would travel, and then since the internet, not when I was young with the can and the string, communicating, to the guy across the office from me or across the bedroom from me, but in more recent times, I now do online teaching and counseling with men and women all over the world. So yeah, I'm very aware of the similarities in the issues that many of us have, and also some of the cultural differences between all kinds of issues, including sexual, romantic, and relationship issues in people in different cultures and different countries.
So, Jed, since you said your books are have a heavy element of your story, your autobiography, why don't you tell us about when you were an irritable male?
Well, probably if you had known me, I was one of these kids that on the surface you would say was a really nice guy. I didn't express many feelings at all. Back to my father, the fear was if you become emotional, my father was very emotional, had very high ups and very down downs. And so I learned to keep emotions inside. And the only people that were aware of my volatile anger were the people closest to me, which were my wife and my children. And if you talk to them, you would hear a guy who would get intensely angry at times. When my kids were young, I'd get so mad I didn't want to hit them, but I would remember throwing my daughter onto the bed when she was little because I didn't want to hurt her, but I was so angry. I was kind of enraged and out of control. And my wife, and I've been married 3 times. If you go to my website, you'll see my little introduction video says Confessions of a Twice Divorced Marriage Counselor. I've been happily married now. This is the kind of the end of the story to my wife, Carlin, and we've been together for 44 years.
Wow.
But my irritable male syndrome, which, as you guessed and are suggesting, is one of my best-selling books. It's Irritable Male Syndrome. The subtitle is Understanding and Managing the 4 Key Causes of Depression and Aggression. And so I did a lot of work, again, on my own irritability and anger once I could own it, accept it, rather than just being pissed at my wife said, "God damn, I'm not angry. Get off my back." Ooh, maybe I'd have a little bit of, that feelings. Many of us have had that. So, yeah, I wrote a book about it. And again, it's been one of the ones that seems to touch a lot of people.
What are those 4 main causes?
Say it again.
What are those 4 main causes?
Well, what we found in my studies, took me a while to get it, is the first one have to do with hormonal changes, hormonal fluctuations. I saw it initially at midlife, that when we're in our 30s and 40s and 50s, often as our testosterone level starts to drop. I didn't know this at the time, but low testosterone is one of the underlying causes of irritability and anger. We think of testosterone as being, the hormone of aggression, which it is and can be, but it's also aggression and anger that comes from low testosterone. So hormonal fluctuations are the first. The second have to do with often irregularities in brain chemistry and low serotonin levels. And interestingly enough, we're, again, hidden low serotonin. We know serotonin is the neurotransmitter that we think of as high moods. It's when we take antidepressants, they're selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, which basically help get more serotonin into the brain system. And when we eat low carbohydrate diets, which is a popular among many people, many men, you want to eat low carbs and get back to meat eating. But if we don't eat healthy carbs and we don't get enough healthy carbohydrates, it lowers our serotonin levels, which makes us more irritable and angry. So that's number 2. Number 3 is increasing stress levels. And I think we all are aware of both the personal stresses that we feel in our lives and the societal pressures of living in the world in a very stressed out world, a conflictual world. So that's the 3rd level. And the fourth major cause, are what I call the changes in our sense of ourselves as men. That is, our roles that we play, that we're, so many of us, unprepared for being fathers, unprepared for being partners, unprepared for being husbands, some because many of us didn't have good role models, some because we live in a society that does not teach us very well. So that's the 4th issue of not having consistent roles that we understand and can actively engage. So those are the four. I've added a fifth since the book came out, which are kind of the existential stresses that we have when, as men in particular, we were in a sense, the hunters, the gatherers through most of human history. We left the safety of the campfire and went out, and we were the ones that were aware when environmental things were changing and would tell the tribe, it's time to move on. Food is getting scarce. Well, now we don't move on as hunter-gatherers, but men still, I think, feel the larger issues in the world and feel some terror around that, not just for our own stress, but the feeling of what's going to happen to my children, my grandchildren, the state of the world if we don't change things. So that's a long way of answering, why I am and have been irritable, and what are some of the things we need to attend to if we're going to address those issues.
That's beautiful. That's why you've been irritable. Hans, why have you been irritable?
Yeah.
I don't understand that question. Jed, I have a question for you.
Sure.
It looks like at least part of the work you've been in touch with and saw dating life. How have you seen dating life, especially in the States, evolve over the past decades? And is it getting better or is it getting worse for men?
Well, like so many things, I think in the world, it's a bipolar answer. That is, there's a lot that's getting better. I think people are understanding more the truth about how we can develop real intimacy, which I think most people want in the dating world. I mean, this idea that all men want is sex. We're not interested in intimacy. We're not interested in connection. We just want to get laid. We all have a biological drive, including women, females. It isn't just a male issue. But men have always wanted more. And we haven't, again, often had the guidance for how to do that. For instance, one of the things we haven't talked about yet, but I said my wife and I have been now third marriage, happily married now for 44 years. One of the things she will tell you is that part of the reason we have a successful 44-year marriage is because I've been in a men's group that's been meeting regularly for 45 years. And I think part of what's changed in the dating world and in the relationship world is more men are getting real connections with other men, which may seem a little paradoxical if, what we're thinking about heterosexually is I want to find a woman or another guy or whatever your sexual preference is, but having real intimate connecting relationships with other men where we can learn to get comfortable in our own bodies, comfortable in our own hearts, comfortable in our relationships, I think makes the dating world and the connecting world more positive. On the other side, it's crazy because we now have a lot more confusion, a lot more fear, a lot more, women who are themselves conflicted and confused. And so the messages they give to guys about how to connect are confusing, and there's more polarization among lots of, different groups. But in the heterosexual world, which is what I've lived with and where most of my, people I've worked with are, although I've worked with lots of people in all the different areas of sexuality and gender. There's really a lot of conflict and confusion. So there's a need for honoring the progress we've made and also recognizing we've still got a long ways to go.
Jed,
Thank you.
the topic I'm most interested in talking to you about is this topic of the challenges, that men face physically, hormonally, entering, let's say, midlife, late 40s, 50s, 60s. And you wrote the book Male Menopause, which I don't particularly like that title.
Good.
I don't like the idea that I'm having a menopause.
Right.
But
I didn't like the
what is
That's
that?
one of the symptoms, Michael. That's the first symptom.
Well, let me give you a little. Let me give you a little insight. I didn't obviously. If you had met me before I wrote the book, which was in my, as I said, my own midlife challenges, because I had been with a midlife wife at the time who was going through menopause, and I had a lot of complaints about our sexuality and about her and her hot flashes and all the shit I had to deal with her going through these things. And as she kind of came out of it, she said, "I think you got some stuff too, my friend. I think you're going, come on, men don't go through that." Well, I like many of my books, when I get confronted with, I wonder, I'm at this age, I kind of know I have hormones, they're dropping. I knew enough about, basic biology. So I started really looking into this and doing some study. And what I found was nobody had really looked into this. If anybody talked about men and midlife, it was, quote, the midlife crisis. And it usually had to do with sexuality. Oh yeah, he's going to get a young, good-looking, young thing on his arm, and he's going to go off and get a sports car and yada da. But when I really started looking into it, I found it was much more complex. And at the time, nobody had written anything. And so when I was doing the research, I couldn't even read studies, because most of the studies that were going on at the time were not in the US. They were in Denmark, they were in Sweden, they were in Australia, they were in Russia. And so I actually had to get studies translated to even read them to see what the issues were. And once I did, I wrote the book, and I decided to call it Male Menopause because that's what the studies showed. There was actually more in common between what men went through and what women went through than the differences. I thought in my head before I studied it was that whatever the differences were, they would be very different. And what we would call it would be the more scientific term andropause or viropause or something like manopause that would be manly. But the truth was that there were more symptoms in common with women than not. So I called it male menopause, and it became an international bestseller. It's been translated into 17 foreign languages. You have some of my current books you can see over my back shoulder there on my other wall, which you can't see, are the 17 different translations that have been in every language from Chinese to Japanese to Russian to Portuguese to French, German, Hebrew. I mean, I can't even, I'd have to look at them to remind myself how many there were. But the take home is this is real. We understand now what the changes are. They're both hormonal, they're physiological, they're psychological, they're social, they're sexual. And if we understand them, as I've gotten very well understanding, it changes not only the time of life that we call midlife, but it also then sets us up for the rest of our lives, which I've found in simple form is when you hit midlife in your 40s, 50s, and now midlife is actually being extended. My friend Chip Conley just wrote a book about midlife, and he says, given our longevity revolution, that midlife can be considered anytime between 35 and 75. Think of that. So I'm just getting through midlife now as I'm 80, and midlife and all its different parameters becomes really the transition point between our first adulthood and what I call our super adulthood, where we become, in fact, not the beginning of the end, as many people feel as we hit this time, whether you hit it at 35, 45, 55, or later, but really the beginning of the most passionate, the most powerful, and the most purposeful time of a man's life. So this is for you all who are in this age group, or aspire to this age group, or have come through this age group like me. This is the time to start really getting ourselves in good shape in all the different ways, not only so we can have a great midlife, 35 to 75, but so that we can also have a good rest of our lives. For, many of us are going to live into our hundreds. That's my expectation, that I will live long life. My neighbor, Edie Ciccarelli, a women tend to live longer. She is 118 years old this year. She's, I think, the longest living person in the United States. She lives down the street from me. So she's my role model for living long and well. And I want to teach men, which is part of our goal with what we call our moonshot for mankind, is to help men live as long and healthy as women as a group, so that we can all enjoy our midlife and our later years. So that's a short introduction to male menopause and why I wrote the book and the follow-up books, and why I think it's so important that we understand these issues.
That's great.
He is 40 years older than you, so you're only 2/3 the way there. Hans?
Yeah, I think it's great. I was working with a former gigolo who's teaching his ways of female sexuality, and he described women going into menopause, that they become different people, different persons. They really are different persons, and to apply that to men, I think is both very interesting and insightful. Because if you could see it like that, and the way you describe it, I think is very, very powerful. That you're becoming someone new, and this is the time where you can really step into purpose and start take care of your health in many ways. I think is a powerful idea, that you're shifting into a new phase, and that requires different attention. Very insightful.
Thank you.
Jed, what are let's say, the symptoms of male menopause? I assume it's somewhat related to the irritable male syndrome, but what are the symptoms of male menopause?
Well, I didn't know it was related when I both started the studies, and if I'd have looked at my own life, I might have noticed it more. I'm only able to see what I could see, which is all of us. But the main symptoms that were talked about at the time, and were the ones that were most noticeable, had to do with sexual areas, a loss of sexual potency, loss of erections, loss of ability to maintain an erection. This is during the time when I was doing my original studies. If you remember Viagra, that was a drug at the time when I was doing it, was just in clinical trials, because it had started out, didn't have that name, as a drug to lower blood pressure. And what they found was, in the clinical trials, after the study was over, people didn't want to give it back because it had this side effect that had to do with maintaining erections. And so they rebranded it, they gave it a new name, and that was when Viagra, came out. And so one of the symptoms was loss of sexual potency. Another was loss of sexual desire. People at midlife didn't have that same desire, often for their same partner, or would be looking for love in all, quote, the wrong places, looking outside the relationship. It had to do with loss of energy. So there's a lowering of energy, sometimes a lowering of body mass, of muscle. And there was a symptom that I discovered that nobody else had noticed. I did my own study. And one of the ones that I found in, again, midlife men that was not being reported was irritability and anger was increasing at that age. And at the time, nobody had reported that. And so in my study, I said for the first time, we need to recognize, because I think they were finding, very high percentages, the two main characteristics of loss of libido, loss of erectile function. Well, irritability was just as high or almost as high as those symptoms, like 88%, 90%. So we began to look into that. And then, as I shared earlier, the irritability and anger were related to the hormonal changes that were happening for men that underlie both the symptoms of sexual desire, erectile issues, had to do not only with the loss of lowering of testosterone, but also, the inability to connect on deeper levels, the stress levels that were increasing. So once we began to put those pieces together, we were able to then develop a whole lot of both treatments, everything from change of diet to exercise to stress reduction to, counseling, interrelationship counseling, helping people deal with stress. And all of a sudden, we now had a whole new arsenal that I have put out in the world in various forms for men, particularly in my clinic. But if you can't help men, you can't help women, and vice versa. So anything that helps men is going to help women, and women can learn from us and we can learn from them. And so our clinics that I work with both men and women.
And what is that protocol, if you don't mind sharing?
Say it again.
What is that protocol? Like, what would you recommend for a man who is going through male menopause?
Well, the first thing that I tell people to do is to get clear about the realities that you're going through that. I developed a questionnaire that's in the book, but I give it to anybody that emails me. If you just send an email to jed@menalive.com, I'll send you the questionnaire, and it's got a scoring device with it. So it's 50 questions. You answer the questions, and it tells you, based on our studies, what level of male menopause you're going through. Is it minor, major, and what then some of the specific treatments are that would be helpful. I also have one for irritable male syndrome. So all of the books, actually, now that I think about it, of these various topics, often there were questionnaires that were part of the research that I kept then as tools, and I just make them available to people if they didn't buy the book. Of course, I'd like you to buy the book, that you'll get a lot more, but happy to just send you the questionnaire for free as a public service to anybody that would like to continue this process of learning on your own. I'm happy to do that.
I appreciate that. What are some, if you could just hit a few of the broad stroke, directions that we need to be going in, let's say if we are going through that? What would
So
that be?
first you gotta get, you got to personalize it. That's my whole thing, is personalized healthcare. So general things, who cares what's generally true for the average guy who's 40, 50, 60 years old. You want to know, what do I need to do if you're an individual? So you find out yourself. Then, since I'm talking to a few individuals here and a lot of people that are watching this, then what we want to do is some of the common things that are going to come up for most people are going to be helped through change of diet. So I give some very specific, what are you eating? If you're eating the typical, all American or all world male type diet, lots of animal fat, lots of that may not be the best diet for you if you're not eating other things. So diet, exercise, if you're sedentary, you're sitting on your butt too much, you're looking at cameras too much, you're not getting out in the natural world. We help people with specific exercise program. We help you deal with stress. So I have a whole protocol for stress reduction. We have a whole thing for relationship counseling. What does it mean to be a sexually full and whole person? So sexuality is almost always a part of what men can use at every age and every time of life. So they're very specific things. Those are kind of the most common that people who take the questionnaire say, yeah, these are the first 5 areas that we have people working in. And then, once you've done those, then we see what else is there. Or if you're not the typical average guy, you may have some other things that you may need to deal with that are not as common, but very important to you.
So, Jed, a lot of people might say that men are the cause of all the world's problems. Why would we want to help them live longer? And does the world need strong men, powerful men?
Well, I think it's a rhetorical question for you and for most of us, but it's a very real concern in the world because the belief is that if there are problems in the world, somebody must be to blame. I think that itself is one of the biggest problems that the world has to deal with. The idea that if there's a problem, somebody must be to blame, somebody, some individual, some group of individuals. And what I know and what I've been teaching and training for years is that we live in systems as well as individuals. We are individuals, part of larger systems. And if the system is dysfunctional, one of my colleagues for the last 50 years is a woman named Riane Eisler, who wrote a book many, many years ago that really looked at she called it the chalice and the blade, and was kind of contrasting these two seemingly male-female systems, the chalice being the feminine, the blade being the masculine. And she said, this isn't about masculinity or femininity. This isn't about patriarchy or matriarchy. This is about what she described as a domination model, a domination system, as opposed to a partnership system. And so part of the reason I was so interested in her work, I had just written my first book in 1983, Men Alive, when it came out. Her book came out in 1987. So when we met in San Francisco, I was really taken by, at the time, one of the only major feminists that was writing at the time, saying, it isn't all about men, people. This isn't men being the problem and women being the victims. This is about all of us being part of a system that isn't male or female. It's a domination versus partnership. Language is important. And I've been trying to spread the language. Quit talking about patriarchy and matriarchy. That's not where the problem is. Let's talk about domination and partnership. When you do that, all of a sudden, it's not us against them. It's us recognizing the reasons why the traditional partnership systems that humans have lived in for 2 million years changed about 10,000 to 6,000 years ago. Long time, but in the scheme of our human life on the planet, not very long. And there are things that now we are confronting all over the world of domination systems in various countries, of, quote, strong men, domination leaders that are not strong men at all. They're actually weak men, who have been wounded in their families and in their systems. and then become dictators or become fascists or become people that are going to promise the world to, if you just follow me. That's part of the problem in the world. So that's the changing of our system dynamics and healing the individual men and women. I happen to work with men and their families, so I work with men and women. We work, and I work both on an individual level. So I talk with individual men and women. I talk to couples. So we work in an interpersonal relationship world. I talk to families. So we have that larger family system. I interact with communities and give community education talks, and I deal and been invited to speak in different countries to look at how do we change the whole system of a country. And all together, which is interesting with the three of us on this call, is we represent different countries where we live in different parts of the world, because ultimately we as a world need to come together, but you do it in these very specific ways at an individual and then the larger collective levels.
I see this book on your bookshelf back there, Long Live Men. That's a bit of a controversial title these days. What is that? What is that?
It's my latest book. I'll just reach back over my shoulder here and bring it up close. This is the last most recent book. The subtitle, which you can't see, is called The Moonshot Mission to Heal Men, Close the Lifespan Gap, and Offer Hope to Humanity. So that's what this is about. It's just came out earlier this year. And it really was a recognition of a research study that happened about 20 years ago, with two of my colleagues looked at cultures and countries throughout the world. And what they found in every country studied, men died sooner, died at an earlier age as a group, and lived sicker. In other words, had more diseases than women as a group, which I think increasingly people are beginning to know. But what these guys in their studies said, which for me 20 years ago was a call to action, which was that they found that if you could simply help men, because we know now how to help men live longer, healthier lives, if you could help men simply live as long as women as a group. And some of us already live longer than some women, but if we could do that all together as a group, they said you would save 375,000 men's lives every year in the United States alone. So that was 20 years ago. You could save even more now. That was in the United States alone. Every other country has the same ratio, generally, of men living less healthy lives than women. And their conclusion, which also was a call to action, was that if you could do that, you would do more good in the world than curing cancer. So 20 years ago, I reoriented my website, Men Alive, to address what we know are some of the areas of most discrepancy between men's health and long lives and women. One of the most discrepant is in the area of suicide. We know the suicide rates for men, again, in the US, but this is generally true everywhere in the world, are 3 to 17 times higher for males than for females, and it increases as we get older. In other words, the suicide rate for 60-year-old men are 6 times higher than the suicide rate for 60-year-old women. Well, we're all getting older. We all have stresses, and for 80 men and women, 85 and older, and I'm getting there. My wife is 85, I'm 80, so we're right in that. The discrepancy between the suicide rate for 85 and older men compared to 85 and older women is 17 times higher. So in other words, we're all getting older. We all got our stuff to deal with, but some of us, called men, take our own lives. We die by suicide at 3 to 18, 17 and a half times higher. So this call to action This moonshot for mankind I mentioned and the book describes is our attempt and our call to bring together 1,000 men's organizations all over the world. And I think there now, when I started out, there weren't many. Now I believe there are at least, probably more, 1,000 good, positive, forward-thinking, healthy, helpful men's organizations throughout the world. We want to be a hub to draw all of them together. And secondly, we want to draw in 1 million men and their families, 1 million men and their families, individually and in relationship, to come together to make men's health a priority. Because if we can help make men's health a priority, we also stop not only suicides, but violence, which is the other side of harming ourselves. The other side of harming ourselves is harming others. And so the violence, interpersonal violence, the domestic violence, the wars that go on, the conflicts that go on, this is at core a system problem, and it's at core a problem that men are intimately involved with, both as perpetrators, but also as victims. We think of men being the ones that do the killing, but most of the people that are dying of male violence are other men, as well as women and children and others. So this moonshot for mankind, that again, you can go to moonshotformankind.com. We have a website for that. And you can see our little introductory video and opportunity to join us. We encourage anybody that feels interested and energized, come check it out. But that's the latest book and the latest passion that I have for what I want to be doing over the next 20 or 30 or 40 years, however long I am blessed to be able to be here doing this work and being carrying on for my 5 children, 17 grandchildren, and right now 2 great grandchildren, and that'll probably roll out as more grandchildren and so on get born. But that's my work. That's what I invite you all to check in and join us if you feel so moved.
Yeah, thank you. Frederick Marx shared passionately about this when I talked to him last night. We watched some of his videos about rites of passage, and he was talking about the final rite of passage, death. And he had a short video of an honoring ceremony he created for his wife before she passed. I think she had cancer or something. And,
she did.
Yeah,
Frederick is one of the core members of the Moonshot. He wrote a piece in the book, as did the other members. We have people that have been doing this work for quite a long time, being part of this movement. We invite everybody who's doing this work and is interested to join us, because together, literally together, we can change the world for good.
Yeah, it's awesome. I put my name in there. I gave Frederick some feedback that I think the website where you put that in could be more clear to get to, but it's and he's got a big heart. And I think that particular ritual, honoring people before they pass, man, what could that transform in our society?
Yeah.
That's so beautiful. I want to ask you, before we go, about your personal routine for staying young and youthful. Are you doing, what kind of daily exercise are you doing and stuff? But before I do that, I just want to remind everyone that we got 2 days or a day and a half left on our summit here. We're talking to 70 great men and mentors of men over this time period. And if you haven't put in your name and email over on the main site, we're at callingallmensummit.com, or that link that Hans has put in the comments. And come and share in the wisdom and the brotherhood and the mentorship and men coming together for our own and each other's health and well-being. Jed has obviously been at this for a long time, and our next guest, who we were going to have in about an hour from now, has run into some transportation issues, so he will not make it. But at 4 p.m. Eastern, we have Soma Miller, who takes men into nature as brotherhoods to find wisdom and connection and aliveness. Look forward to talking with him. And that's going to be right here on facebook.com/calling all men summit. So let's come back to Jed. What's your secret for being so energetic and full of vitality as almost an octogenarian?
Well, I just initially comment that part of it is connecting with men like you guys. I know a lot of the men that are in the summit that are giving talks. We've gotten to meet them over the years. Some of them are very intimately involved in the work that we're doing. But I think having that passion that I mentioned and power and purpose is part of what keeps me active and alive, because I think I say there are two days that are important in our life: the day we were born and the day we found out why. And I mentioned my date of birth is December 21st, 1943. The day I found out why was the date my son was born, on November 21st, 1969. So having the passion for this work, I think, is part of what keeps me young and engaged. But beyond that, I have a regular health routine. I did it just before we came on. I walk every day, rain or shine. And since COVID has hit the world, which is another wake-up call for being out of balance with nature, it isn't just an accident. It's a wake-up call if we listen. I wanted to increase my health. I'd been very healthy and active, but instead of just doing my regular workout every day, which I did, I added walking hills. So in addition to walking every day, I now walk some serious hills so that I can expand my lung and health capacity. I eat a fairly healthy diet. I'm not a total vegetarian, but I eat mostly natural things that grow out of the ground, and eat fish occasionally, and not very much of things that are processed, and not very much of manly beef that is full of hormones. And if I do eat beef, it's locally grown. Unfortunately, I can do that because we have good beef in my area. And the other thing is stress reduction. We live in a very stressed world. It's going to get more stressed. And, I kind of, this reminds me, and I'll just say it because it's part of what I think and do. The statesman Václav Havel made this quote that I was thinking about today. He says, "I think there are good reasons for suggesting that the modern age has ended. Today, many things indicate that we are going through a transitional period when it seems that something is on the way out and something else painfully being born. It is as if something were crumbling, decaying, and exhausting itself, while something else, still indistinct, were arising from the rubble." It's Václav Havel. And I think part of the thing that we all need, and I think men are being called on to step forward into a world where we need to create centers of sanity and compassion and care, where we can begin to break through the us against them and realize that we're all in this together. So I do that every day when I walk my community and stop and talk to people and actually talk to them and ask them how they're doing and get to know them. And it doesn't matter what political their party they are or what their beliefs are. We're all part of this human family, and we all need each other if we're going to, get through this transition time. And we need hope, and we need, the passion of the spiritual warriors that we all are and can be if we're going to get through this together and help for our kids, our grandkids, and future generations.
Amen. Amen. Jed, thank you so much for all the decades of care and hard work that you put in for men and for humanity, and yeah, all of us. And thank you for taking your time today and coming on this live stream, multi-stream, bearing with us through the technical challenges of that. And thank you, Hans, for joining us here as you have all week. I really appreciate you, man. I appreciate everyone watching. If you've enjoyed this, share it with a friend, share it with a brother, tag a brother, and we will see everyone back here in 3 hours to speak with Soma Miller. Jed Diamond, thank you again.
Thank you, sir.